Hi peeps, it's Tersse back in the old squat box once again, and I'm bringing to you the end of a discussion about the future of education. I found it pretty interesting, and I'm sorry that I didn't think to record the whole programme. I'd love to have brought that to you, but it's a BBC programme. It's actually on the BBC News 24 channel, but they occasionally do stuff like sport, a whole half hour of sport, or a whole half hour of an interview of people involved in certain aspects of our society. And it happened to be 3 people involved in education. One of them who's spreading education across Africa through very low daily payments by farmers and local small business people who can afford to pay like 30, 40 cents, a day to put their kid into a school where they're going to learn perhaps in a better environment and better education than what they would get from the local government public schools, And the other guy is a guy from a private education system where they do online and privately built colleges and universities around the world. They're a very small company, but they're part of the sort of infrastructure of universal learning, around the world, But it's private, it's for profit. The guy who's doing the stuff in Africa, they're for profit as well, but most of what they earn goes to pay the fees for the teachers and to rebuild and build more extensive educational facilities across Africa. So a lot of their money gets ploughed back in. And the other guy is from Liverpool University, and they've actually got a university they've built in China. They also have this idea where the money they get in China, they're not allowed to make a profit out of it. Everything they make in China has to be ploughed back into expanding the university in China. But what they do have is, and this is where they make a profit, is the Chinese pupils can either learn for 4 years in the university in China, or they can learn for 2 years in the university in China, and then in the next 2 years to get their degree, they could then come to the University of Liverpool and enroll there for the last 2 years of the degree course, and that's where they actually then pay the foreign student fees, and Liverpool gets money from that way. So it's an expansion of Liverpool University basically from Liverpool to China. And they've recently opened up a branch of Liverpool University in London, which they also think is going to be empowering for them as well. I've listened to the conversation, and I've made a change to my view of, I always thought that public education was a great thing, and I still believe it is a great thing. But I'm being swung by what I'm hearing, especially with the way that education is changing. I'm being swung that there is room for private education, privately funded education. And there's also room for, if not non-profit, low-profit education. There's room in the education system, because obviously the public education system is not doing great at the moment in most of the Western world. So there is, in my view, a way to blend these different aspects of education: the public sector, the private sector, and the non-profit or low-profit sector, so long as the aim is to educate and not indoctrinate. I'm certainly not interested in religious schools. I don't care what MD says that if religious schools are fucked handed, right? But I understand the idea of giving education to people in foreign countries. Perhaps Britain gets a fund from the government, £80 million, to build schools, colleges and universities in India, Africa, South America, and brings to it a very low fee pay, you know, a break-even point, maybe just make a little bit of profit in order to renovate the technology, you know, the structure of the buildings, and to hire perhaps better teachers each year or each semester, and, you know, not take too much profit out of it, but allow them to pay back the fees that the government gives them to build, you know, the facilities over a long period of time, you know, 40, 50 years, but allow them to take out a fee each year, you know, a certain amount of, you know, what you would call maybe profit each year, but have very low fees is what I'm talking about. And then there is a view that we do need perhaps some private run education facilities, but they need to be of a very high standard. I mean, for the money that you're paying, if you're going to be paying someone £9 or £10 or £15,000 a year, or £40,000 or £50,000, that education needs to be of a fucking extremely high standard. Otherwise, it's basically you're just robbing people. So there needs to be, you know, a lot of regulation and control over who can set up a private, you know, education facility, what they can teach. I mean, for instance, I don't see the point in setting up a private facility that teaches law, let's see, accountancy, and singing and guitar playing, and then just take the money you make from the guitar players and using that as profit for the money you lose on the lawyers and accountancy. Basically, you know, not every person that goes through a college or a university to become a guitar player is going to become a fantastic guitarist. So you're really stealing that money off of those people. But then again, there's some rich people whose sons and daughters probably are better off not learning anything more than playing the guitar or drums, because that's about what they're fit for. And if their parents are rich enough to pay for the rest of their lives, not for those people to take part in life, that's fine. But then again, we come to the public education system. As the guy says in the video, the reason the private schools work is they're not teaching sciences, mathematics, physics, biology, chemistry, medicine. These are very, very expensive things to educate people in, because you actually need to use equipment which costs millions of pounds to have, you know, or get access to. So that's not a thing that the private industry is going to be interested in. They're not going to build a fucking collider, you know what I mean, in Edinburgh, you know what I mean, or, you know, in Liverpool or in London. They're not going to build a, you know, a hadron collider anywhere in Britain, right? That's just not going to happen. And you're probably not going to get access to it from a public or a private school which is mostly teaching law and, you know, accountancy. So you wouldn't go there to do a physics degree, for instance. You know, you would go to a public school. Now, I understand this is going to change, and these people discuss this, where education is changing. There's a lot of this idea where you can get fantastic lectures from some of the greatest brains in physics and medicine and math online, and then you go to your college, and instead of the teacher lecturing you, you've seen the lecture. Now what he does is he answers your questions about what you've seen in the lecture, and then narrows down the exact way that you would go about solving the problems which have been discussed on the lecture video. And that's how you would learn. It's a case of being given some knowledge. You know, you get the knowledge from the lecture, you take notes, you try to understand it, and then you go to you know, your lecturer, and instead of him giving you the lecture, he takes you back over the lecture and narrows down the places where you fail to understand what was being said, and helps you to comprehend what was going on there and get the real knowledge in your head, and then sets you further perhaps problems for you to go and do as further research, you know. Because with internet now, yeah, you could just go on and steal the answers, but if you really want to know something, really want to be good at it, you don't cheat. You actually go there and you bash your brain against that brick wall over and over and over again, and then you talk to your lecturer again and you explain what your stopping block is, where you're failing to understand, and then he clarifies it for you, and it should, the spark in your head should go off and go, you should have that, what's it, eureka moment. Eureka. Now, oh, I get it, yes. You know, and that takes you to the next level of your education. That's really what. So I see there is a place for all these kinds of education systems to integrate and be provided for the populace on a whole. You know, I still think there's a problem that we're not facing up to, which we used to understand maybe 40 years ago, more so than today, and that is that not everyone has the ability to understand certain things. And someone may think they're a mathematician, or may think they love numbers, but they're just not good at math, and they can't pick up calculus or algorithms, you know. Some people just never grasp it, you know, and that's where, you know, some people can get to a certain level, you know, in a subject, and that's the level that they finish at, that they will never go any better. And I think we need to be, well, I think in a way we do still do this. You know, the cream rises to the top, sort of thing. The problem we have today is in our society, we think that everybody's cream. We believe that everybody can be cream if we're all given the same information. And that's just not true. So there is a point of where we need to be doing, not exams so much, but there's a time when people need to be confronted with difficult problems they've never faced through their education, and see if they've got the brains to overcome that difficult problem. I mean, I think it was mentioned in this video where instead of just doing CSEs and GCSEs, people should you know, 16-year-old kids should be given a paper and just told this is just a test. Okay, class, 30 of you here, there's your papers, 30 people get the same paper. Let's see how well you do on that, you know. And it's actually an entrance exam for, say, Cambridge or Oxford, you know, from like 10 years ago. But, you know, let's just see how the kids do and pick the cream out. Pick the cream out and say, you know, you could go to Oxford or Cambridge. You could go to one of the best universities in the world. And that should be done not just in colleges, but it should be done in schools. It should be done in all schools, all public schools across the land. The children should be brought in and they should feel it's fun and there's no pressure, because this isn't a big test, but it's not going to count in you know, your O level, your CSE. It's just me, the teacher, giving you this exam. Let's just see how you all do, and there's no pressure on you because it doesn't matter. But it actually is going to matter, because some people who have high scores are going to be picked out for potentially getting, say, government grants to go to a university later, you know. And I think if we're going to be spending money on atom bombs and, you know, fucking jet planes and fighter planes and fucking, you know, developing bulletproof vests for the soldiers, we could spend some money in sending some of the best brains from every school in the country to a university and giving them the opportunity to become the best scientists, mathematicians and medicine, you know, biologists that we can find across the whole country. I think that would be ideal, especially if it was done in a sneak away way, you know, this doesn't really matter, it's just a test, you know, and not let people know that, you know, the reason they went to university through a government grant is because they passed that test or got a high score in it, you know. I think things like that is the way to go, at least for now. Obviously we'll probably find better ways of doing stuff like that, but I do believe that is the reason to have a public school service. That is the reason to have every kid in your country having a public education, because that's how you find the cream of your country. How else would you find the cream of your country? You can't count on GCSEs. Every cunt gets that. So how do you find the cream of the cream? You give them a university degree test, you know what I mean, when they're 16, and then just find out who gets the best score, and who understands more. I know that it's not a perfect judge, because some people mature and understand things later, but it would give us a fair borderline sort of test to find out who is intelligent, smart in certain areas, English, math, physics, biology, that sort of thing. It would be encouraging as well to see it being done and see some people rise from meagre beginnings to, perhaps the highest heights of math, physics, and medicine and biology. Rather than leaving school, perhaps not going on to college because they just feel there's other things they want to do in their life, like surfing or snowboarding or some fucking shit. And yet they might be exactly the people you want to have going on to a further education that they didn't go to because they couldn't afford themselves and didn't want to take on debt. And the government should be paying for the best possible brains in the country to have an opportunity to become the best brains in the country. But then, that's just my view on things. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this next little clip. It's quite interesting if you listen to these three guys in an interview talking. Shows you a little bit about how, I think anyway, that the public education system, private education system could work hand in hand. If you listen to them and see that, yeah, although some of them are trying to be competitive, if they were to work, and cooperation with each other, we could probably have a much better education system. But then it all comes down to money, and as I say, why are we spending hundreds of billions of fucking pounds on nuclear bombs when we don't need them anymore? Anyway, Swanjivan.
There is this almost unstoppable demand for education at all levels. In my case, I can only speak for higher education. And it's a demand which really cannot be met solely out of public funding. If you look at Asia and Latin America, which are two of the biggest growth markets in the world, the choice is really either there has to be some source of private financing of higher education, or simply people will not be educated. And so I think the private sector on the whole in those sorts of markets supplements rather than replaces the public sector higher education.
I think you should separate the delivery of educational opportunities from this more nebulous concept, abstract idea of education. So education, fine, is something that we value and is imbued with values. The delivery of educational opportunities can be a business like any other, and it benefits from bringing in the disciplines of business to make a better experience for young people and learners. So I think that's where you've got to come from. I think separate those two.
Well, I joined BPP from a public university that was under-resourced, underfunded, did not specialise, was not offering the best service it possibly could to the profession that I practiced. And so I joined a private company that had those resources available to better make the needs of clients. And the fact that we have a third of the entire legal profession studying with us is testament to the fact that better resources can be put in, that you can do things. And you've got to look at what is the purpose of the business. If the business is there solely to make money, it's a bad business. If it's there about improving the educational experience, then of course why should it matter whether it's my taxpayer money that's paying for it or the private employer's money that's paying for it? By 2025, the world population will have increased by 1 billion. Do you know how many universities on Howard's traditional model we would need to create every week to satisfy that population demand? It's 4 new universities that have to open it every week. That's impossible. Yeah. It's impossible for the state to be able to create that. So you do need private capital to help.
Well, a few years ago I did some work with the OECD, which is the intergovernmental organisation based in Paris, which acts as a kind of think tank for advanced countries around the world. And we looked at higher education, and what we found was that all countries really want to invest in the skills of their population, so they all want to expand their higher education systems. But they all want to do it at the same time as increasing the quality of that higher education, but they don't want to place an increased burden on the taxpayer, and that is what has opened up the market for the private provider.
You're all in a rather interesting case, though, of competing against the state sector to some extent in Ghana and even in vocational training in the UK.
And we do in China.
And you are in China very much. That must raise certain kind of interesting business issues of their own, where you've got a big dominant state player, if you like, a sort of monopoly. You're coming in, you're the number two, or you're like the number two. Is that an interesting position to be in?
Well, I think it all depends on the regulatory environment in different countries. So how higher education is regulated is absolutely key. And that applies equally in the UK, of course, where we have a system of very highly regulated higher education at the present time and have had for many years. I think in our case in China, the circumstances were a little unusual because we were invited in specifically to, if you like, offer an alternative to the state-run universities in China, especially the so-called national universities, the 74 national universities. There are, after all, over 3,000 universities in China, believe it or not. So,
isn't it?
it's an awful lot.
Most of them private. Yeah.
Most of them private.
Yeah.
They have private universities in China too.
A very senior politician in India said to me that there's not one parent in India today who sends his or her children to a government school by choice. And that's a situation in these countries. It's very different from here. You've got in the urban areas, you've got a majority of children going to private school, a substantial majority, 60-70% in many of these countries. You've got in the rural areas, you've got a significant minority, and so so the market is not distorted in that same way. And in a way, in Omega schools, the choice for poor parents is not really between us and a government school. It's us and another low-cost private school. That's our competition.
Well, that brings me to a very interesting area, which is pricing. I mean, I think one of the distinctive things about education, certainly the experiment in higher education that we've started in this country, in England, nobody wants to compete on price because everybody thinks the consumers want quality, and if you're seen to compete on price, you're sending a negative signal about your quality.
It's too early to say.
Well,
isn't it?
but I mean, that's the perception
happened.
That's what happened in the first year, right?
Yeah.
That is a fascinating piece of...
But that will change. So
do you think so?
Absolutely, yes. Because the whole system is changing, isn't it? And universities like Liverpool and Newcastle we're oversubscribed. I'm sure you are too. They will be able to keep that high price. Other universities, the only way they will be able to compete is to bring their price down.
What do you do in Ghana, though, James? Do you compete on price in Ghana?
Well, it's a funny situation there.
I bet you don't.
We try and be the lowest price because we see a mass market here. And so we're a very low margin, high volume business in a way. That's what we want to do, is to serve as many children as we can. So we keep the cost down because that our market is parents who would previously not be able to afford a low cost private school, have to send their child to a government school or no school at all. They've got to have the price low, otherwise the market will disappear and we'll just be competing with other local.
But you don't find parents saying, I'm not going to go to that Omega school because it's too cheap.
We do, and we're very happy with that,
right?
Because that's not our market.
I think in UK higher education, though, first of all, we had the introduction of the cap on the fee, which essentially then became a guide price. So, as you say, who is going to charge a lower fee and publicly claim that they're of lower quality? Because wrongly, that's how the public perceives it. Then you have the issue of some universities are selling on brand and not on price. And therefore you're in the situation of what an economist would call a positional good. That is to say, if you halve the price, you probably would take down the demand with it.
Yeah.
So, when we all know that Volkswagens make Skodas, the build quality of a Skoda these days is pretty good. But if you put a Volkswagen badge on the bonnet, you can charge a higher price, and there's something about
this point, because the price of an undergraduate degree at BPP University College is 2/3 of what it is at Liverpool. We had a 128% increase in the number of applicants last year.
Yeah, but how many did you have? It was quite small, I'm guessing.
What, 100? From the number
in
of
absolute
students,
numbers,
because the undergraduate provision is only tiny. But there is an indication after 3-4 years of operation that there is some price sensitivity. Of course, you need the cap to come off, as Lord Brown recommended it should do, before you'll start to get the price variability in the market.
But you've only recently been on this level playing field, haven't you?
Absolutely.
So the fact that you're only slowly increasing your numbers, you're only now really competing with Liverpool and Newcastle.
It's the private sector that's adding this dynamic of competition.
But only in low-cost, high-value-added areas, not in medicine or physics or
But Howard,
chemistry.
are your online courses, are they £9,000 as well?
Well, we don't do undergraduate online, but the point of your question is a valid one. The price is roughly the same as a conventionally delivered course for an overseas student.
But there's no cap on overseas students anyway in English
never has
universities.
been.
Never has been. So, there was.
There's always been a market, and the same is true for postgraduates as well. But the point I'm making to Carl is that yes, you can charge a lower fee based on lower costs for classroom-based subjects, but if you're into areas like medicine, veterinary science, dentistry, which we are, they're 40% of our students. 70% of our students are in sciences. They are high-cost subjects, and frankly, even £9,000 doesn't cover that cost.
I wanted to get onto this issue about different ways of teaching, because here's what you might expect by having a flourishing private sector. You might expect innovation. Why you might think you'd like a bit of private sector activity in the background is because of of the kind of new technology of teaching. And you would have thought we were on the cusp of a revolution in teaching. You've got the potential for delivery. The American universities delivering services in different ways. But how much of that is going on? How different are you being, Carl, in the way you teach?
Massive investment going into this digital revolution, and you're referring to the massive open online courses that are being offered, which, they're first generation. We know that only about 9% of students who sign up for those courses actually complete them. And interestingly, only about 50% of the faculty that teach on them have the academic qualifications that would cut the ice in a traditional university. But we're spending literally millions on new learning platforms. And it's interesting, you've sort of pitted the private sector versus the public sector. This is where actually they combine together. I know that Howard's university uses a platform from a private provider for its learning platform.
Liverpool was a private university.
They're all private. They're all sort of public, sort of private. They're in this sort of grey area between. Howard?
Well, yes. What is interesting, I think, is that we're talking about learning rather than teaching. Let me say that straight away. And I think that students, if you listen to the students, what they want are two apparently contradictory things. They want to have access to information over the internet when they need it, and why should I go to your boring old lecture when I can get all that on the internet is a very common refrain. But equally they want personalised navigation through all of this through a personal tutor. So paradoxically, I think that the future will flip. That the kind of information conventionally delivered through lectures will be delivered over the net in a structured way. But the learning will take place through individual student mentors, helping them to navigate their way through all of this.
And is that student mentor an academic professor, or is that student mentor a very good mentor of students who may not be sort of supreme in the subject?
I think that will vary on what level of student we're talking about. I think probably a first-year student would not necessarily need a full professor, but by the time they get to the third or fourth year, they almost certainly do. And I think the future is what we call in the trade blended learning, where there's a mixture of online access to information with conventionally delivered pedagogy. Now, and we'll see how that goes.
The famous example at the moment is Khan Academy. Khan Academy, an American non-for-profit but private organisation, which throws onto video 12-minute or roughly 12-minute lessons. Yeah. And they're being experimented in charter schools and private schools in America, where the children, their homework is watching the lesson, same as watching the lecture would be for the university level. And in school then, they do problems, they discuss with peers and teachers how to solve those problems better. And so it's flipped. Instead of having the teacher lecture to you or give you a class lesson, you get that at home, you get that through the video. And you
might get it much better, because the person on the video may be better than the
person's going to be the top person, the top expert in the world.
There's more to higher education than sitting in front of a computer screen. We need to remember. Now, there is a niche market.
There's more to lower education as well. The peer learning, group learning.
So you can do that. You can do the lecture bit very much more easily.
There's a niche market of mid-career professionals who are quite happy to do it all online, because they can work it around their other responsibilities. But for the generality of students, there's more than sitting in front of a computer screen.
In some ways, if you could, I'm just thinking globally here, and particularly countries like Ghana around Africa, if you could teach very well without needing qualified teachers, who I assume, James, are something of a constraint on the ability to deliver new schools in much of Africa. Well, you have done something quite good for humanity. If you don't need teachers to teach, then obviously you'd then need computers or you'd need IT of some kind.
And you need to disaggregate the role of the teacher as well. The different things that a human being is needed for, putting your arm around a child to comfort him or her, being a social worker, a policeman, all those things that are there, a friend.
If you look, the government's policy is to try and create one large provider who will issue degrees and not necessarily get involved in the whole teaching and learning process, but be an awarding body. That is one of the policy objectives of this government, that you could see the traditional university under attack from that kind of model.
Because you can take an exam. You can take a
Absolutely.
London University external exam,
Absolutely.
and you can get a London University degree without ever having studied.
It's just like A-levels and GCSEs at the moment. You can go to a national award body and take their examination. If you start to future think, why would you invest in the real estate in schools? What is the point, apart from the childcare for the parents?
Socialise, but that's back to Howard's point. There's more to it than just the...
But why do you need that 9 to 5 every day of the week?
But the one thing you all absolutely agree on, the industry, if you want to call it that, is in a state of some flux, and the private role is growing rather than contracting. It's becoming more of a business,
Absolutely.
not less.
Around the world, enrolments in private universities is growing faster than in public universities. There are a larger number of private universities than public universities. There's a recent report that came out that was evidence of that. So it is growing because government can't afford to match the demand. The digital revolution is going to massively change things. And I do think in 10 or 15 years' time, school will not be like it was when we went to school. I look at my young children who, at the age of 1 and 2, are using the iPads to research information that I wouldn't have even thought about looking at.
At the age of 1 or 2, for goodness sake.
My 2-year-old teaches my 1-year-old how to use an iPad. Now, when you've got that kind of peer teaching going on, you've got to ask yourself, what role is the sort of traditional old-fashioned schools? Why do you need that model when they can learn independently and confidently on their own?
Well, yes and no. They can do, but I think there's a difference between information and knowledge. And turning information into knowledge, there is still a role for the teacher.
Well, that is a good point on which we should draw to a close. Let me thank my 3 enthusiasts for this business of education. James Tooley from Omega Schools, Carl Ligo of BPP, and Howard Newby, Sir Howard Newby, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Liverpool. Do visit our website, bbc.co.uk/bottomline. You'll find a link there to our partner on this programme, the Open University, I should say. And you'll also find details of how to download the programme there. Otherwise, that's it for this series of the programme, but we will be back in May. See you then.